Hi, I'm Regan Robinson, your host of Future Fit, the only podcast unraveling the secrets of how the world's most innovative leaders stay future ready in a fast-paced world. I've spent over 20 years as a futurist and strategist, transforming top global brands and putting investment-backed startups on paths to sustainable growth. Along the way, I've become obsessed with new ways to prepare for the future, because thinking about the long term once a year simply isn't enough. In each episode, I talk with movers, shakers, and path breakers who share their stories about how they turn uncertainty into their strategic advantage. Throughout our journey, we'll discover unconventional and imaginative ways to help you thrive today while leading your teams into tomorrow. Future Fit leaders know that being prepared for what's next is more than a business decision. It's a way of being. Let's venture together as we co-create a new future readiness playbook. The future can't wait, and neither can I. So, are you ready to get future fit? So today I am thrilled to welcome Jen DaSilva, a seasoned integrated marketer with over 20 years of experience working on Fortune 500 brands. Jen is the president of the VML boutique creative agency Berlin Cameron and is the executive officer of VML West, where she currently manages Mazda, AIG, and other key client businesses. VML is a global creative agency that's celebrated for its innovative and award-winning work for blue-chip clients, including Ford, Microsoft, and Coca-Cola. And Berlin Cameron has helped weave the cultural narrative for clients such as Vitamin Water, Amazon, and the NBA. Jen is a champion of entrepreneurship, having launched LLShe, a Berlin Cameron division that empowers female entrepreneurs through connections and creativity. And she also founded Connect for Women in 2019 to empower women and allow them to network effectively. Jen also advises female startups and sits on the national board of Girl Up. And she was previously on the board of the National Kidney Foundation, where she received the Visionary Leader Award for her service. Jen's using the power of creativity, connection, and vulnerability to do things in bold, new ways. And so I am incredibly excited to hear what she has to share with us today. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored.
Likewise, the honor is all mine. So let's dive into our conversation with a question that I pose to all of my guests, which is, what does future ready mean to you?
Future ready means to me having a tremendous web of connections. That is something that drives me every day. The connections are what uplifts us. Connections are what keeps us going. It keeps us connected. It keeps us the things that I've learned from my grandmother, who is 99.5, is how she established connections for her entire life. And she's had to change those connections over the years to really be in par with what she's doing at the time, right? So she's a mother. She has to build a web of mothers to help her and to be in that community with her. Now she's in her retirement community. She has this amazing group of women that have dinner with her every night. They get together for cocktails. I recently went to visit her, and this is last year, and she sent me an email. She said, "Jennifer, I would love to have a cocktail party to introduce you to 10 of my closest friends. Would you be willing to do this?" And of course. And the notion of having 10 close friends at 98.5 is amazing. And that's what I aspire to have. And that makes me future ready. These connections and people that can uplift me, that can drive things together. That's what I find important.
Yeah. Well, what's coming up for me is that, by focusing on your connections and nurturing and building connections, that exposes you to different perspectives, diversity of thought. I always call it bumping up against the other. And I think that is actually really important, because when you're future ready, you actually have this hyper awareness and this ability to take inputs, insights, if you will, and really connect the dots in a holistic and powerful way. And so that, I think that's a really interesting take on future readiness and the importance of, you've got to get out there and expose yourself to different ways of life, different ways of thinking, different types of people, because then it becomes a big differentiator.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually reminds me of a story when I was starting Connect for Women. And this is something that I've built out of kind of the goodness of my heart. And it's a volunteer-based community. And I had started connecting 4 women a day for an entire month and then opened it up to others. I had
Hmm.
this conversation with Daisy Auger Dominguez, and she said to me, well, what are you doing to make sure that the community is diverse? And I said, well, it's open to everyone. And she's like, well, that's not good enough. And
Right.
wasn't calling me out. She was really calling me in to tell me to ensure that I was making that community diverse and making connections that are diverse to enable people to do exactly what you say, think about diversity of thought, challenge themselves with new points of view. And I think that
Hmm.
that's really important.
Yeah. Well, and there's an intentionality that when you're really intentional about intergenerational learning and that live in different parts of the country or the world, there's a lot of different ways to define diversity. And so that's what I really strive in my work as a futurist. And one of the things I love the most is just
Yeah.
the depth and the breadth of industries. I could go on, and I think that actually helps contribute to my superpower in this regard.
Yeah,
So I'd love
absolutely.
to just dig in a little bit more on that. So being future or being ready for the future means more than just having knowledge and abilities. It's about really developing a mindset that thrives on change and innovation and continuous learning. And by seeking out new and diverse perspectives, and like you said, challenging yourself, you could actually think more creatively about the future and make these unique connections that we're talking about. So what are some ways that you prepare your mind for future-oriented and creative thinking?
I think it's for me, it all goes back to connection. And I hate to keep saying that, but it is about that when I make the connections. And sometimes I'm meeting new people all the time. And one of the things when I built Connect for Women, I said to myself, I need to meet one new person a day, as well as making these connections for people, because it enabled me to make the connections, because that new person, that I could connect them into the other people that I know. But in meeting them, it inspired me and drove a fire in me that brought up new ideas, new ways of
Mm-hmm.
thinking. And sometimes we get stuck, right? And
Oh, yeah.
especially I do this too, where I get so comfortable at home, or I get into a groove where I'm not being as present, or I'm not going out as much, I'm not networking as much. It's funny, I started the podcast. I haven't done this in a long time. I'm a little nervous, right? Because it's about getting back on the bike and riding again. And
Yeah.
once I have that connection and put myself into the situation, it drives a fire in me that
Yeah.
brings to life my entrepreneurial side and really helps me to think about what I want to do next, what other types of innovations I would like to bring to my work, what other innovations I would like to bring to my own circle, how I can connect
Mm-hmm.
more people, and how I can grow Connect for Women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What I think too, the more that you engage in thought-provoking conversations about existential or like philosophical questions, that can challenge your thinking, broaden your perspective, spark new and innovative ideas. And I think also too, as I think about connecting with others, I think the role of serendipity, that's
Mm.
actually really plays a really important role when preparing your mind for future-oriented thinking, because it's a mindset that opens you up to unexpected discoveries and new connections, again, that can lead to innovative ideas and unique solutions that are not evident through linear and conventional thinking processes.
Yeah, I find that sometimes the ideas are so simple and they're already within, but to be
Mm,
talking to someone about them and where they might challenge you, well, what's next? How are you going to monetize this? How are you thinking about this?
yeah,
And it causes you to think of something that you might not have. And I love that. But it's
yeah.
also listening to people talk. And I think
Hmm.
too often it's a one-way dialogue instead of a two-way dialogue. And I always try to maintain in my conversations that two-way approach. So I'm learning just as much from the person as they might be learning from me.
Yeah, yeah. We'll never underestimate the power of questions, especially what if questions. And
Mhm.
I think probably what you're experiencing is so important. I tell leaders this all the time. It's like you're too inside out, you need to get outside in, and you need to assumption bust. And you need to be aware of what cognitive biases is. A lot of the work that I do with leaders is like, okay, well, you're not seeing everything. That's okay. Nobody can. And that's why it's really important to have a conversation with somebody
Mhm.
so that
Yeah,
you can unearth what you're not seeing.
absolutely.
So I'd love to talk about research. Now, I often share with leaders that strategic foresight, which is the discipline that I use to help brands strategize for their future, is not about extended research or market research. And that's because you can't just ask a bunch of people sitting in a room, what do you want for the future, right? That doesn't really work. Instead, you've got to really support them in a process of imagining potential futures that are complex and that are not always positive or negative. And so there's a diverse view of the future that I help people step into, hear and share perspectives on and make sense of, so then they can understand, well, what does this mean for my company? So as someone who's steeped in research like yourself and who's collaborated on reports like The Cost of Loneliness, which will delve into loneliness a bit more, I'm really curious, how are you using research to understand what your clients might need in the future? And how are you using those insights to drive growth or figure out what's next for VML and Berlin Cameron?
We are looking at research all the time. And I think sometimes you look at research and you think to yourself, okay, well, this is going to help enable me to make a decision. But I think what it really is, to your point before, about asking the right questions, right? We test creative all the time. And is it going to be creative A or is it going to be creative B? And where are consumers leaning, right? But really, in what it is thinking about the insights behind what they told you about the work and really listening to them to evolve and adapt the work to push it forward. Sometimes I think that we get so steeped in the data and the research that it's overcomplicating things. And I think the special sauce is how you can simplify the data and get to a very quick insight, right? It's about the art and science of the data and really making the two of those things come together. For our Mazda team, we have a 20-person data team that's constantly looking at the data and how we're performing, what's happening within the media, what's happening with our creative, right? But it's best when it all comes together, when there's one insight that drives a creative idea, that drives a unique approach that then drives back to sales, right? Yeah. And so I think that's when it all works best together, is when you're thinking about the art and science of it.
Yeah, I think that the holistic approach is really powerful. And while data is important, I always remind people intuition is actually it's yet another superpower, especially when you're exploring customer insights. And so it's important, if something resonates strongly or deeply on a personal level, or if it sparks curiosity, it's worth investigating further, even if it doesn't necessarily align with the data. That's the beauty of imagination, intuition, and creativity, and how all these three actually different things really work together in harmony.
Right. Your intuition is such a important thing. When you feel that like fire in your belly, or your hairs are raising up on your arm around something, or is just moving you emotionally. And I think too often we don't let ourselves make decisions that way. We have to over rationalize them and are thinking about them. But what really moves you is how is really best to move forward. And we try to point clients in that way, right? But it also having the backing to know and that it's going to be the right decision, because it's their brand on the line, right? And they want to make sure that we have the data behind it to know that their intuition is also right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know if you've experienced this too, but I find as I've gotten older, I keep forgetting how old I am. I think I'm turning 47 this year. I was just on vacation with my family and we were like, how old is Regan? I just started blocking it out of my mind. But I find that as I've gotten older and I've really figured out a way to hone my intuition and really listen to it. You have to be really actually intentional about it. But I do combine data with intuition. I've just found that it also enables you to move a bit faster.
No, absolutely. It is very important in making intentional choices based on your intuition, or what are going to make you most satisfied and happy, right? And those are extremely important to fostering your own growth. So I completely understand that. I think there was a story the other day that was talking about the choices you make in life and where you thinking about it in terms of prioritization. So if you're saying, well, I can't go to the doctor, and then you say, well, I'm not prioritizing my health. And it then shifts your dialogue to think, no, I need to prioritize my health. So I have to go to that doctor's appointment. I can't prioritize something else over it, right? And so I think that's a good way to start thinking about choices and various decision-making things.
Yeah, when it's this intentionality too that we've been talking about. I feel intentionality has become a buzzword a little bit that's lost its meaning, but it's actually pretty important. And when you're really intentional about everything that you do, I find, I don't know if you experience this as well, but it's actually enabled me to do a lot more with less. And to be, I used to work at a state where I was very overwhelmed, where a lot of people that I talk to, I feel are stuck in, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah. There is a cultural shift right now to intentionality. So it might be a buzzword, but yet, if you look at some of the data right now and what we're going through in terms of the market and everything, people are facing more intentional. And actually, like Jay Walker Smith just put out a new research report from Kantar, and it talks about being boring and actually making very intentional choices for you, because that's where we are right now after the pandemic and after going through all these things, right? And then coming out of the pandemic into the world. And now this notion about being more intentional for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you said at the top of our conversation, another keyword, simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's actually hard. I knew this through creative, but it's actually a lot harder to embrace simplicity than the opposite. But once you nail it, once you've got to practice it, all these sort of capabilities and competencies that we're talking about all require work. But in my journey, I've just really experienced the more I push myself outside my comfort zone and continue to move through the world in this way, that you start operating on like a flywheel, where even if you might step off the road on something, because you're always engaging in the other, doing new things, you're able to jump back in much more quickly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very true. One of the reasons why I stayed at Berlin Cameron for so long is because Ewan Cameron, the founder of it, had a simplicity of thought in his way of thinking about things that I'd never seen before. And it was so incredible to learn from and watch, because it would be like this moment where you're trying to solve a tremendous brand challenge and everyone's in it and everyone's getting over complicating it. And you're in the weeds, and he would come up with something so simple. You're like, shit, why did I not think of that myself? Like, it's so simple and obvious. And it was like this thing. And that, like, when I feel something now and a brand idea comes across my plate, it's those ones that feel like, yeah, duh, that brand is doing that because that makes sense for them. And it's so simple and beautiful. And there's something beautiful about simplicity.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So let's shift gears to the topic of connection. Now, fostering a culture of connection, as I said in our sort of warm-up chat, I don't think it's a nice to have. I actually believe it's a strategic imperative for companies who want to be future ready. And while it might not be immediately apparent, loneliness and future readiness are surprisingly interconnected in ways that can profoundly impact a company's ability to thrive and be future ready. And your mission is to foster meaningful connections through authentic and vulnerable communication. And you're raising awareness about how loneliness can impact performance. So how does fostering a culture of connection contribute to your company's ability to stay future ready? And what's maybe been the most challenging or surprising about it?
Yeah. I think of loneliness really as my life's work. I'm an only child, and I grew up constantly seeking out community and connection. When I was younger, I actually asked my parents, like, where could I find community? And then one of the ways in which I thought I could find community was at church. And I said, will you guys go to church with me? And they said, well, we'll drop you off. And that didn't seem like a strategy for a 10-year-old to go to church alone, but I've always tried to find and build that community. And so when this opportunity came about and we started this work last year, it was really about establishing what I was feeling. And I had just moved to California, and I was trying to build a new community myself here. And it's actually been very difficult and challenging for me, which is not the normal. I've been able to do it in several different places in my life, but coming from New York City into this world was such a different place and a different culture that having trouble acclimating. And so we started to study this notion of loneliness, and it was with The List, Anne Choquette, and Benison Strategy Group, and to establish that there was this problem and that other people were feeling that way. And now now where we've taken the research and doing it this year is, okay, we know that there's a problem, but what can we actually do about it? And I think the data is still like from year 1 to year 2, the data is still there. I mean, it's not moving, it's not going down, it's actually going up, which is shocking. And we know that the Surgeon General said that loneliness is an epidemic on par with the pandemic. And really, this is something that we have to think about, right? In various different ways, right? Within the communities that we live, within our work communities, because it is actually impacting people greatly through mental health, through their jobs. And we see that 86% of white collar employees between 18 to 34 have felt lonely or isolated. And I find the Gen Z part of that stat very shocking because I didn't think it would pertain to younger people. Versus 76% of people who are 35 and older, because they always said, well, it gets lonely as you go to the top, right? Because there are less of you. There might, as for instance, for a woman, there might not be another person that has been in that role before. There's no one to connect with.
Yeah.
But what's even worse is that 40% of those workers are saying that they feel loneliest during work hours compared to other times of the day. And they're feeling isolated. They're not feeling supported in their careers. They're stressed, overwhelmed, and disconnected. And then these employees that are feeling this way are 4 times more likely to feel dissatisfied in their current career, which obviously leads to turnover, cost of recruiting, hiring, and training. And to put it simply, loneliness is not only bad for employees, but it's also bad for business. So what can we do to do something about it? And people feel like it's up to corporations to do something about it. 75% of people feel that it's the corporation's responsibility to do something. And I haven't seen many companies doing it. From a brand level, I've seen Airbnb. I think Hinge is putting efforts into this. I think there's more from a brand perspective that can be done here. And then also from a cultural internal perspective. And I think one of the things that is really interesting that came out of our research is we did a segmentation around and found this group called the cultivators. And the cultivators are the people that raise their hands to join all the team meetings. They want to plan the company Christmas party. They want to be a part of the ERGs, right? They have this solid network of colleagues and friends, which they've nurtured. And so how can we identify these people and bring them out as our leaders in this cause, right? So how can they help us to prioritize opportunities for employees to interact in person? How can they help do training around it? How can they help to ensure that we're encouraging and respecting vulnerability, right? And I think that's really important in terms of this loneliness aspect, right? So I think there's so many different things that we can start to do about it. Mentor-mentee relationships, and that can be reverse mentor-mentee relationships as well. But I really think it's trying to nurture a culture that's collaborative and supportive. Competitive is nice sometimes, but how are we actually collaborating together versus competing with one another in what we're doing to make ourselves feel more supported? Actually, like one other interesting thing that came about this week was that people actually only need one relationship at work to make them feel less lonely. And I thought that was so interesting.
Pretty incredible.
Yeah. And so it really just takes one, right?
Yeah. It's not this massive, overwhelming, because I think too, that's when the media picks something up and then it becomes this huge thing, then it suddenly becomes so overwhelming. Where all this work it doesn't have to be. I know you said it in another show that change doesn't have to be hard. And I totally agree with that. And I would say to your point, it's okay, one genuine connection in a work capacity can actually make a huge difference.
Yeah.
And why I'm so interested in this sort of connection point with future readiness is future readiness requires innovation and collaboration, both of which can be hindered by loneliness. And when employees feel isolated, they're less likely to share ideas or engage in creative problem solving, where connected employees are more likely to contribute to a culture of innovation, which is really vital for future readiness. I mean, to me, it's also just not about fostering a culture of connection is not just about like team building exercises and company outings. It's about creating an environment where unconventional methods lead to deep, meaningful interactions that can drive innovation and resilience. Like these topical areas are actually all really connected. And so do you have any tips or advice for maybe things that you're doing within VML or Berlin Cameron to experiment with creating more connection?
Yeah, one of my roles is I'm the Southern California community lead, so bringing together our community here, and it's very hard in LA because people are in various different
Everywhere.
areas, and trying to gather people together is really difficult. And the other
Yeah.
difficult thing about it is VML was remote here in this area, and then we merged with Wonderman, and we are now a much bigger crew. We're trying to get to know each other. We're trying to bring people back into the office. We have a hybrid mandatory policy where we have to come in 3 days a week. So we're trying to do things to foster this connection with everyone. For instance, yesterday, we had a panel of leaders where it was just a live with leaders session where people could ask questions. And we talked about various different things like how the company makes money, getting to know the leaders and what kinds of things they binge, those types of connections, which enable the hallway conversations that we've been missing. Right. And then, of course, there's the fostering of the things that the people want to do, right? And how they want to connect, right? You can't say, well, connect, like you can't force a connection. And we talked about intentionality, right? You have to be very mindful at how and why people want to connect. And so we have culture crew meetings where we talk about the different things and people want to do. And it could be very different for me than it is for someone from Gen Z, right? They want to be supporting. One of the things that I found super interesting recently was like they don't want happy hours because, well, people are drinking less, but also because they don't want to be commuting past 5 o'clock. They want to do it earlier. They want the lunches. They want coffee time. They want a sporting thing in the day. So these connections, you have to make sure that you're listening to people in order for bringing a community together. And I think that's been really important to everything that we've been doing.
Yeah, amazing. Well, another thing that's coming up for me is integrating play in the workplace. Play as innovation can really foster a future-ready mindset while also creating connection, breaks down hierarchical barriers, it encourages creative thinking. Google's very well known for their 20% time policy that allows people to spend 20% of their time on work projects that they're passionate about, regardless of what their role is. And that actual playful approach has led to big innovations like Gmail and Google Maps. So I think that's just one example of how looking at this challenge through the lens of future readiness, innovation, and creating connection can also drive business results.
Absolutely. We had a side hustle program at Berlin Cameron where our employees were allowed to take 1 day a month to their side hustle. And a lot of people have those passions, right? And it could be for me about connection and connect for women, or it could be for someone else about a business that they're trying to start, or even caretaking that came up as like other people's side hustles. And it was really interesting because it brought back to the community because they were able to talk about the things that they were doing during that time, right? And we were able to connect around it.
Love that. Now, you've talked a lot about leading with vulnerability, and I believe that vulnerability can actually be a catalyst for future readiness because it forces you to acknowledge that nothing can be predicted or controlled. That's my point of view, except yourself, right? And this acceptance can lead to more agile and flexible strategies. And it also allows you to tap into an emotional intelligence or an intuitive edge that makes you more perceptive to subtle shifts in the market and consumer behavior. So what does vulnerability in leadership look like to you? And how do you cultivate it within your team and company to drive innovation and prepare for the future?
Yeah. It's been something now. So my son is 11, and I would say that prior to my son, being born, I wasn't vulnerable at all, and I didn't think about it at all. I grew up in a culture of you had to come to the table perfect, right? And there was no room, there was no margin for error. And as I came into my own being and my own self, and I became a mother, I was like, there's so many margins for error. I can't control this child's crying when I don't understand. I don't know what to do. I'm trying to do the best that I can. And that enabled me to bring that back to the workplace and say we don't have to be perfect. And even
Mhm.
it's come into play with trying to make the client make decisions, right? There's
Mm.
test and learn approaches, right? Going into market in not complete perfection, but enabling ourselves to learn through the process, right? Is
Yeah.
sometimes a great way of doing it. But I am not shy about saying I've cried at work, and I had some backlash when I wrote a Refinery 29 article about it. Some mean people that said it was totally inappropriate. I have gotten emotional when someone told me that they were leaving because I cared about them so much, not because I wasn't happy for them and any of that.
Hmm.
Um, and I've gotten so emotional of pride with my team when they do something amazing. Like anytime I will see something and where they've done it and it's come together and in a way that just amazed me, I almost always well up. And I say to them, I don't think it's bad to show emotions. And as a
Hmm.
result, I think that comes back to me as well, and that they can show their emotions with me too. And I think that just fosters a deeper, more intentional connection with the person, and has really made me a better leader. And I think people want it as
Yeah.
well. They want to be able to be their authentic selves. And that's something that I strive to be and strive to have those relationships with the people that work with me.
Yeah. Well, what's coming up for me is vulnerability creates a safe space, right? And it's all about creating psychologically safe spaces. And by the way, when you create a safe space, that's when the wild and imaginative ideas come to the fore, and which is essential for risk taking, exploring uncharted territories, and staying ahead of the curve. Howard Schultz from Starbucks is a big advocate of sharing personal struggles and the emotional connection to his vision with the company. And he always talks about how this vulnerability enabled him to stay attuned to changing customer desires and to foster a company culture that was more adaptable and more resilient. Like he talks about sharing your soul and your conscious with people. I thought that was really remarkable. And I even think vulnerability, you can take it a step further, where Netflix would be an example of a company who disrupted the entertainment industry, not just through technology. Yes, that
Yeah.
happened, but they also openly acknowledged the unpredictability of consumer preferences. And so by being vulnerable and experimenting with diverse content, then they were able to continually adapt viewers' tastes, therefore enabling the company to be more future ready and sustainable. And so I think there's this really interesting opportunity to turn vulnerability again into an unexpected strategic advantage. Patagonia would be another example of a company that uses vulnerability when they discuss the environmental impact of its products and operations. So again, it's like this inside internal cultural opportunity, as well as, okay, then how can we harness this culture that we've built to drive bottom line business results?
Absolutely. It was sometimes using vulnerability in negotiations, right?
Mm.
Can be a way to do it. Or when somebody's reacting to you in a negative way and coming with intense feedback, another way to do it is being open and humble and vulnerable about why things are the
Mhm.
way that they are, and
Yeah.
how you're going to help them make it better. I think there's so many strategies around it. It's incredibly shifted the way that I think about the world, and really
Yeah.
motherhood is what did it for me.
Yeah. Amazing. That's a great story. So David Bowie once said that the future belongs to those who hear it coming. And I love this quote because it taps into the essential nature of foresight and long-term thinking. And it really highlights the importance of being attuned to emerging signals and subtle shifts, those things that are really signaling what is next. And some companies ride the wave of uncertainty into the future, and others do not.
Mhm.
But this work is not for the faint of heart. It is challenging work. It's not a one and done annual offsite. It is actually something that you have to continuously do. And so I'm curious, what gaps or difficulties are you facing when anticipating and strategizing for Berlin, Cameron, and VML's future? And what wisdom would you offer for leaders who are struggling with similar challenges?
Mhm. I think one of the things I'm going to go at it from a client perspective, is marketing transformation can be incredibly difficult. And how are you helping them prioritize, right, their objectives? there are so many things to tackle, and you can get very mired in, well, here are our 10 growth priorities and how are we going to achieve them? And sometimes you don't have enough people to do all 10, but what are the two things that you can do well and those priorities? And I think that oftentimes agencies, and I've been a victim of this, think we can do it all. Like we do everything.
Right.
And as a result, you're not prioritizing your strengths, and I'm building against those strengths and building the future readiness of those strengths. And I think that's really important to our business at VML, right? And how are we getting better at the things that we already do well and making it even more advanced, right? And innovative. And what are we working then with our other WPP partners to bring them in where they may be better specialists? And something that I learned at Berlin Cameron, that always having to tap into the network, and it goes back to the web of connections, is if you have the right network, you can get what you need to get done, right? And going to the right people to build the team that's necessary to take those objectives forward, I think is the best thing that a leader can do, is help to prioritize and then help to have that network to build around those priorities.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to prioritization, it's also about asking bold questions. Like that can actually be a great way to filter out all the unnecessary, right? By asking those bold questions that don't just make us feel good, because they make us feel good, right? But that actually make us think hard. And I think true for future readiness lies in not having all the answers, but having the courage to ask questions, the resilience to navigate the journey as it unfolds. And then to your point, knowing what your sweet spot is and like where you're most passionate about playing, right? Because that is an important driver. And then tapping this network and these connections that you have to collaborate in a more meaningful way.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Was there anything else that you would like to add before we bring our conversation to a close?
No, I truly appreciate the opportunity to share and connect with you. I think it's incredible to be able to have these conversations and to be able to talk about things like loneliness. And sometimes people are uncomfortable even talking about the fact that they would feel lonely, right? And to be able to be vulnerable on these types of podcasts. So I appreciate you having me today. Thank you.
Yeah, listen, we can talk loneliness and vulnerability and do both of those things anytime you want. A final question before you share where our listeners can find out more about you. So, in your view, is preparing for the future more about managing risks or capitalizing on opportunities?
I think capitalizing on opportunities. I'm not someone to always think about the negative. I'm always someone to think about the positive. And I think maybe that I've worked with a lot of people that lack that trust and are constantly like digging beneath the surface to uncover problems that might not even be there. And I personally am constantly trying to push forward on ideas. And sometimes that can be super vulnerable. I recently launched Break the Glass Ceiling Day on May 15th, and it's the first inaugural day of its time. And it happened very serendipitously. I picked this day, May 15th, and then I realized that May 15th was the 135th day of the year, and we have 135 years to get to gender parity. And so it was this perfect day, and it was very vulnerable to invent something like that, put it out, get a team around it, not a billable team, right? To get to activate on it and then get it out there in the way and not have all the time that you wanted to devote to it. And I think that those kind of fiery ideas that come up and pushing them forward is really taking the risk, which I get really excited about.
I love that. And with that, where can people go to find out more about you and your work?
I think LinkedIn is the best place. I also have a website, connect4woman.com, and then my own personal website, which definitely needs an update, jenniferdasilva.com.
Amazing. And one last plug. So, what about your cost of loneliness report, which you already talked about, which is a collaboration between Berlin Cameron, the Benson Strategy Group, and the List, which is the leadership community where we met? Where can people go to check that out?
So the website is called 10minutes2togetherness.com. And the notion is that if we apply 10 minutes to connect with someone, that this can actually change the loneliness epidemic and actually make us connect more in a very easy way. So it is 10 minutes to togetherness.com.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time and your insights, Jen. It's been enlightening and I've learned so much and I've had fun exploring with you today.
Thank you. Me too.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Fit. If you're listening, you're probably future curious. So follow me in my newsletter on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going and share your discoveries with the Future Fit community. And if you enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe, rate, and review Future Fit on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time.